So let's start looking at some of his poems. So we'll start with this one because I think it's fairly simple, but most of these, it might be hard to find the actual number. In my text, it's Sonnet 12, but I know in different editions they get moved around a bit. But it starts with, why are we by all creatures waited on? And I love this poem because it instantly makes me think of when I was a kid. My grandfather was a rancher in Montana. That's where my family's originally from. And so he had cattle and horses and all this. And I'd go up sometimes in the summers and I'd be just a little boy and I'd help him. We'd be out riding and we'd be doing work on the farm or on the ranch. And it was always funny that here I was, this little, 7 or 8 year old boy, and, I could control this gigantic beast beneath me, this horse. And I could get off the horse and I could walk up to, 1,000-pound cattle and move over there, and they don't do anything. They just kind of go where you want them to go. And it's amazing that a tiny little boy could have power over these gigantic beasts and that they don't, trample me in an instant. And that's sort of where Donne comes at this piece where he thinks about the other creatures of earth and thinks about our connection to them. He says, why are we by all creatures waited on? Why do the prodigal elements supply life and food to me, being more pure than I, simple and further from corruption? So we humans have been created to be superior to these animals, even though they're bigger than we are and more powerful, and they're more innocent. We're corrupted, we're sinful, we have problems, and yet we're placed above them. God cares more about us than these actual innocent animals. Why brokest thou, ignorant horse, subjection? Why dost thou, bull and boar, so sillily dissemble weakness, and by one man's stroke die? Again, these animals are huge, and yet we have control over them. It's kind of amazing. Whose whole kind you might swallow and feed upon. Weaker I am. Woe is me, and worse than you. You haven't sinned, nor need be timorous, fearful. Animals are innocent, we're not. But wonder at a great wonder, for to us created nature doth these things subdue. But their Creator, whom sin nor nature tied, for us his creatures and his foes, hath died. God chose to die, sent his Son to die, for we sinful, pathetic animals, when he really didn't have any need to. He's the Creator. He could do whatever he wants. And yet he made us vulnerable and broken and sinful, and still did this for us, even though there's other animals in our world that are much more innocent than we are. He even calls us his creatures, his foes. An interesting final use of describing us there, that sometimes we actually are in conflict with him, whereas these animals, they're never in conflict with him. God created them. He loves them. We're the ones who fight against him, and yet he still died for us. So that's one of his more, I think, easier ones to grasp. But let's keep going with a couple more. And one thing, as you'll notice as I read most of these out loud, poetry becomes much more helpful to you when you read out loud. So I know it might be a little embarrassing, or you might need to do it in the quiet of your dorm room, or just whisper to yourself when you're at lunch reading, or whatever you do. But try your best to read out loud. You'll hear the rhythms better, and it'll make more sense to you. So poetry needs to be read in a slightly different way than you read other things. So the first poem we just read, notice how it starts. It starts with a question. Well, he does that a number of times, and these are two of the ones I like the best. Starting with a question so we can see how he works through the thought process. Again, these are intellectual exercises. So he starts with a problem in his brain that he can't quite figure out. And through each line, it seems like he tries to come to a conclusion about it. So this one he starts, Thou, God hast made me, and shall thy work decay? Repair me now, for now mine end doth haste. It's an interesting question. This is God, the creator of all, the universe. He made me, but he made me that I'm actually falling apart every single day. We're decaying. He could have created us to live eternally and be beautiful and perfect, but he didn't. He made us things that actually are starting to rot. So the question is, well, why would you do that? He says, I run to death, and death meets me at fast. We're in this unavoidable collision course with death. We can't avoid it. We're headed towards it. It's coming towards us. It's going to happen. And all my pleasures are like yesterday. The good things I remember, they're in the past. I dare not move my dim eyes any way. Despair behind and death before doth cast. Such terror and my feeble flesh doth waste by sin in it, which it towards hell doth weigh. Sometimes I feel like a little kid lying in the dark, right? Where you lay there, you think you hear something. Maybe there's a monster in your imagination and you lay there with just your eyes open and you're frozen. You don't move because you don't know what's going to happen. Again, he knows that physical death is coming, but he also fears a spiritual death that maybe, like reminiscent of Hamlet, what's beyond might actually be worse than what this is. Only thou art above, and when towards thee by thy leave I can look, and I rise again. But our old subtle foe so tempteth me. I like the word "our" there, that he puts God and man together when we're fighting evil and sin, that we're in this together. That not 1 hour myself I can sustain. I have to have God's strength to survive. I'm not going to make it without it. Thy grace may wing me to prevent his art, and thou like adamant draw mine iron heart. Those two lines are great. I talked about this with Hamlet, where sometimes Shakespeare uses words that aren't meant to be used that way. The word wing, that's a noun, right? It's a thing. And he uses it as a verb, and it makes our brain go, ooh, pay more attention to that. That's interesting. And then we get the conclusion, adamant. Adamant's like a giant stone, like a diamond, and it has the power to, like a magnet, draw things closer to it. And so he's using God like a giant magnet that needs to draw me closer if I'm going to survive this. I need God's closeness for protection. So again, why would an all-loving, powerful God create things that break down and die? Why does he punish us with that kind of pain? But he always gives us the method by which to get through it, as if he brings the disease but also the medicine. God's the eternal question but also the eternal answer. You're going to see that. I'll talk about paradox here in a second, but that shows up in the film you're going to watch, where she's going through cancer treatment, and actually she was healthier before. The cancer treatment actually makes her sicker, and she's like, what am I doing? The medicine is what's killing me. So we're the same way in our own lives. But starting with questions, and you can really watch Donne's mental process as he goes through line by line. He also uses some other comparisons. So remember, Donne has a bit of a legal background. He went to law school for a while. And so some of his poems have this financial and legal terminology interwoven in it. So I've actually highlighted them for you so it's nice and easy to see. But notice how many of these show up in his poem. This is number 16 in my edition. Father, part of his double interest. And we know double interest means if you're interested in something, you care about it, you look after it. But interest also, has the idea that there's a payment coming at a later date, right? When you have interest, you pay extra. Part of his double interest unto thy kingdom, thy son gives to me. His jointure in the knotty trinity. A jointure was a property held by one spouse, and then it was given to the other. So it's like a contract. He keeps and gives to me his death's conquest. This lamb whose death with life the world hath blessed was from the world's beginning slain, and he hath made two wills, my edition has a capital W, wills, which with the legacy of his and thy kingdom do thy sons invest. Look at all those legal terms. Will, legacy, invest. Notice how these are all gifts too. These are things that Christ is the form of that gift. And we get the benefits from it. We get the investment. Yet such are thy laws that men argue yet whether a man those statutes, laws, statutes, other rules, other legal terms, can fulfill. A lot of people doubt Christ's divinity or his power of salvation, and we don't always deserve those kinds of gifts. And so there's these arguments that come up, like he says, and we wonder, can he even hold up on these promises? None doth, but all healing grace and spirit revive again what law and letter kill. My sins are written down, but the intent of the will, the gift that Christ has given, is going to supersede that. Thy law's abridgment and thy last command is all but love. Oh, let this last will stand. So again, there's this promise of heaven, like a contract, like a will that's left, this gift that's given to us and we're the inheritors of the gift. And again, sometimes he's using this figurative language because sometimes we go, wait a minute, a guy died on a cross for these sins I'm supposed to have, and now I'm forgiven and I get to go to heaven. What does that even mean? But when you compare it to like a contract or an investment that earns interest over time because it's a gift given to you and you're going to obtain the final profit from it, oh, okay, that makes a little more sense now. So these metaphors are important. This one's about the church. So if you're a theology person, pay attention to this one. This is, in my version, number 18. Show me, dear Christ, thy spouse so bright and clear. What is it she which on the other shore goes richly painted, or which robbed and tore laments and mourns in Germany and here? So this is a reference to Catholics as well as Protestants, placing them in different locations. Sleeps she 1,000, then peeps up 1 year. Is she self-truth and heirs, now new, now outwore? Does she and did she and shall she evermore on 1, on 7, or on no hill appear? He's talking about the various headquarters of these faiths. Dwells she with us, or like adventuring knights, first travel we to seek and then make love? Betray, kind husband, thy spouse to our sights, and let mine amorous soul court thy mild dove. Dove, Holy Spirit. Who is true and pleasing to them then, when she is embraced and open to most men. The last two lines are quite interesting. Pleasing to thee then when she is embraced and open to most men. I told you there's still a little bit of his erotic language that seeps into his other poems. He's essentially saying, we've been closed off. We sects of churches have been kind of arguing with each other and keeping each other separate. But just think, if the church were more open, promiscuous in another way of saying it, if we accepted more people, our faith would actually grow. We think that right now our faith needs to be divided. He's actually calling, maybe if we stopped fighting with each other and we all agreed that we know who Christ is and we believe the same thing, we'd actually grow in our faithfulness and we'd be a stronger church. Probably similar to what you've read about Paul in various places, right? So he's pleading with the churches, the bride, right, of Christ, to be more open to the love of God and acceptance of others, especially in the 17th century when they were continuously fighting. So again, you can see these different parallels he's drawing, right? The bride, there's legal terms, he's talking about animals, he's comparing all sorts of things, right? But he also uses these paradox, where you basically take two things that are contradictory, they're opposites, and you make them go together. And again, the critics didn't used to like this. They're like, oh, you're just trying too hard to sound smart. But we're going to look at some examples that prove that these are pretty useful. And again, I mentioned the idea of the treatment imperils my health. You'll hear that quote in the film you're going to watch.